Okay. I think we're going.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat some of what I said so to get on the recording. And do you see the red button up in the left-hand corner saying record?
Yep.
Okay, so University of Virginia back in 2007 put out a statement apologizing for slavery, and they're part of the slavery. Some students felt that wasn't enough, so they formed a group, and it eventually ended up there was a memorial plan to be built at the university. There was a competition in 2010 for the design, and then partly in response to that, President Sullivan at the time created the President's Commission on Slavery in the university. And there might be members of that commission, if there's questions regarding the commission, that are here watching this recording. And Detisa Gathers, who is present and also is one of the descendants, designed this logo that we currently use on t-shirts and on outreach materials. So what I know getting started, I know I'm in a historical area. There's historical homes here. I understand where freedom came from. I had that passion to see records and hear stories. There's a wealth of resources in this area besides your historical societies and the libraries, and of course the university. But there's also a huge local community, which is, we probably have a little more in this area than versus other areas that I do personal research in, because we have the group Central Virginia History Researchers, which we're all a part of. We got Central Virginia Genealogical Association, and we also have the Burke Brown Stepp chapter of the Afro-American Historical Genealogical Society. And we have a wealth of the historical societies. We've got University of Virginia Special Collections, the descendant groups that are at these historical homes, such as Getting Word at Monticello. And of course, there's individuals and families that share their information. I knew there were going to be lessons to be learned, and I knew automatically, bracing myself, there's going to be people that are going to have names, and I'm not going to be able to find them. And I understand there's going to be emotional times. And so some of the research, for those of you that also do slave era research, yeah, some documents might tip you over, some questions might come up, and even question your own beliefs and thoughts as well. So, you know, I was getting myself prepared for this, specifically, I could say, slave era research. So basic understanding for those of you that are new to research also is that slavery was about economics. People were viewed as property. There's going to be the buying, selling, and renting going on. And I knew some are going to be sold deep south, that if I find in a family that I might not find them at all, they're gone forever unless there's some way a DNA connection comes up. And then, of course, there's always free people of color that are also right along with the enslaved population. So I know I'm going to have to deal with many challenges. Yes, records destroyed, not recorded. Some people don't want to talk about it because it's from the past. And some people are going to take that family information right to their grave with them. And that could be the African-American families as well as the white American families. And sometimes I'm not asking enough questions. So I knew I was going to have to face that question. Maybe I'm not getting clear to where I'm trying to go, even looking at the research. And I always question, and for those of you that know me, that I do a lot of teaching of getting started and methods and strategies for doing genealogical research. And one of the things that I teach is that you can't do it all online. And since April, I'm doing it pretty much all online. And so it's been a challenge to be kind of, I'm not going to say stuck, but to rely mostly on what's online besides other aspects in the, you know, things I could access if it wasn't online. I knew ages and dates are going to be all different kind of ways. Sometimes I'm not going to have common sense, and this goes for anybody doing this type of research. Sometimes it's questionable oral history, because oral history gets handed down through generations, some of the stories might change a little bit, or it could be a memory from an elderly person from something that happened to them as a child. So it could be questionable how they saw it and how, you know, someone else in the family might say it. I experienced that in my own family. My mother and her siblings all always had the same story. Oh, they donated these 5 acres of land, you know, to a county. And I come up with a document. They sold the 5 acres for $35 in 1870. And again, it's not my job to dispute anybody's oral history. And it's not my job to challenge it. I just turn it around and say, well, there's 2 versions of this story. I'm going to look for the paper and the documents and the references and the sources, and also include what oral history information I received. And again, there could be some family stories and some expectations versus the research. In my brain, when I'm doing research, I try not to assume anything and just take for what it is. But some things you think of a different era. And so, you know, and as you see at the bottom in red, my 21st century or anyone's 21st century thinking is going to cause a challenge. I can't really judge. I can't really ask questions. I can go for just what's there. But I also can't take for what I know and compare it pretty much to what happened maybe in 1820, 1850, or whatever it is, because they don't have the knowledge or the access to things that we have now. It wasn't even a thought, even when they were creating records. Someone born in the early 1800s might not make it to the 1860s or the 1870s. And I put that as a challenge because of naming patterns. And I always got to make sure I've got the right one, or as close as I can get to justify. And of course, we know spelling doesn't count, but again, that's a challenge that's going to come up all the time. And maybe I don't do enough analysis, or maybe I'm doing too much analysis on some records or some lines. And again, that emotional aspect, it's tough sometimes reading some of the stories or the narratives, or having to use a book as a resource. And there's a lot of things I don't know about the local area. I've been in Charlottesville area since 2003. And so there's so much more to be learned as I'm going through this process. Was that a question or something, Andy? Anyway, I'm going to keep going. So some of the key strategies that I work from is about listening and asking questions, staying local, because I was at first given a time frame. I try to focus on those counties that are listed there: Albemarle, Buckingham, Culpeper, Greene, Fluvanna, Louisa, Madison, Nelson, and Orange. And one of the main reasons are because there always seems to be connections. And it's the family connections, it's the record connections. So at that time, because when I was first hired on, I had 6 months. So I had to stay focused locally, what I could access. I had to learn about the slaveholders. I knew some of them just because of my local involvement. Some of them were Thomas Jefferson's friends. You've got the college professors, you've got more people that had slaves in each of the communities surrounding UVA. The Freedmen Bureau records was definitely a strategy. I devote every Friday to just doing Freedmen Bureau records, because that is a link and it gets me before 1870, and a possibility that if anybody made it that was born in the early 1820s or even the late 1700s, they might have made it to 1865, 66. 1870 census was going to be a key point, and of course the 1940 census. Google's my friend. I ask questions to Google and then search out for resources. I'm going to seek out descendants. A lot of that is conversations with other descendants. And of course, use social media like Facebook and Twitter. And some of the online databases everybody's familiar with: Ancestry, Family Search, newspapers, .com, and then of course the military websites. And there's tons of them that I use. That's just the biggest ones probably most people would be familiar with. And then I call the one strategy, which is reverse genealogy, and I just go back and forth from the time that I see the name that was an enslaved laborer to getting to the 1940 or even later. So the descendants of the enslaved community, and this is what I was trying not to let Tatisa mention, because I was going to mention that, you know, there was planning going on before COVID, and actually April 10th and 11th, 2020, there was going to be the public and private event. And of course, we also wanted input from descendants, as many as we had already contacted. And also my supervisor, who's Kurt Von Docken, and Ashley, who's in the here at the meeting here. Everybody wanted to make sure we had input from descendants. And the Memorial to Enslaved Labor Community Engagement Committee, that's what MEL is in CEC. And so we wanted to make sure anything that was being planned, that was also going to be not just approved, but welcome and embraced, and that some of the input that they felt needed to be there was involved. So I enjoy working with the descendants that I've encountered. So I selected 8 individuals to be like a descendant leadership group. And they're present, they're still very active. They continue to support me and have helped a lot with finding more descendants, and also helping me manage some of the technology type things. I couldn't tell you how to put something up on Google Docs, but I use Google Docs all the time. So they've recreated some of the forms that I've done, and you'll see that in a few minutes. And again, they have a goal and have came together as a formal community group that will continue to be a voice and assist on, you know, the activities that are going on, and also helping me with the research. So slave era research and questions, again, from the genealogical point. I knew I had to know the law during the research. Did the state of Virginia require that people of color register and pay a fee? I know this from other research that I do in other states. I needed to know, where are all the emancipation or manumission papers at? Slave narratives or any genealogical records I could find that would link to a person that was enslaved. Yep, plantation records, inventories, bill of sales, city and county directories, you know, where are these things? I hung out at the Historical Society quite often, in various historical societies, not just Albemarle, Charlottesville, but it was a good place to meet people. And so it was worth, you know, reaching out and being, you know, in the public to know I'm doing this type of research. I am based out of Jefferson School, the African American Heritage Center, so people could find me there. And of course, you can find me online. So I also knew there was research questions that are going to come up, and I got to find the research and also look at what research had been done. So being in touch with the local groups that I've been in over the years, and again, the historical societies were definitely resources. And then whatever I have, I had to share it. So this is a quick look at the spreadsheet that I use as a guide. So you can see the year, a date, the slave owner, like the Brockenborough, and then the enslaved person, and it gave me the status, and then the work that they did. So as you can see, young Sam did carpentry work, and he was enslaved. So that meant that Mr. Brockenbrough got paid. UVA looked at the financial records, and it appeared that they had gathered all the information that funds or dollars were paid for services and labor. And so I worked from this as a guide, this spreadsheet, and this is just an example. So I could get a name of a slaveholder, I could get a name of the enslaved and their status if they were free or enslaved. But I also have on the list unknown for the slaveholder, and maybe just a slave with a first name, or maybe it's a slave with a surname. So I have a first and a last name, and it might not be the same as a slaveholder. And one of the biggest challenges I think I have is not knowing where these people are from. So within the research, one of the first things I have to do if I'm not familiar with the name is find out what county they're from. And it doesn't mean they're Charlottesville, Albemarle, because we've got all these surrounding counties where a lot of these connections come from. So again, I work from a spreadsheet as a guide. I also used a Jewel website and other local resources and things where people have done before that I've been involved in because I'm in these genealogy groups. So talking about the reverse genealogy, again, I could have dates, first name only, not the same as slave owner, as I mentioned. And by the way, according to Family Search, which is the Mormon Church, Salt Lake City, their research says that only about 15% of the enslaved took the slave owner's name. That's not a lot. So also trying to figure out the connection, and you'll see in some of the examples of the connections that the slaveholder and the enslaved did not have the same last name. It's another challenge, but this comes with the territory of slave era research. And again, I don't have a location. Genealogy for me is about time, place, and me asking questions. What do I know? What do I need to know to get through this? And who or what would have the information that I'm missing? So I needed to plan that research out for the resources to, seek out what I needed. I follow my own rules. I teach this across the country, is to follow the money, the land, the water, the community, and the faith of the people. And this is a grounding or like a foundation for me. I'm going to tap into each one of these aspects on coming forward, finding people. Not necessarily going to find this on an enslaved laborer during their enslaved time, but I will on their slaveholder or slave owner. So taking notes is good. And those of you who see me on Facebook, a lot of times I put up my notes. And yep, that's a cup of coffee and a glass of wine, and I got cookies there, or it's popcorn, or it's something I'm snacking on. A lot of times when I first meet with descendants, I'm writing this out. It's not necessarily putting it in any database or anything at this time, because once it gets in my head, it's planted. The names in the tree, in the line, it's going to be planted, and then I start questioning, because my questions come as I write things down. So locating some of the records and resources, I got to deal with house repositories. And what I mean by that is when I'm talking with descendants is, well, who's your oldest relative that's alive now? Or what do you have in your house? Or what's in auntie's house? Has your grandmother still got information, pictures or something? I use Jean's book to the right, and as a foundation. Okay, first let me legitimize that there's a plantation owner with that last name. And in other words, was it someone with one slave, or did they have 50 slaves? I don't know until I start digging in there. I know the recorded property records and tax records and things, I was going to have to hit the courthouses. Of course, again, I mentioned earlier, historical societies and libraries. And why? And you'll hear me say them again, because they're a collector of information. And you never know who leaves their family information at the local library or at an archives, the university, or at a historical society. So I want to check to find out. I used the old principle by Elizabeth Shown Mills, which is called the fan principle. Got to know who the plantation owners are and who their neighbors were. And the FAN stands for friends, associates, and neighbors. So if I'm looking at a record or looking even at a federal population census, I want to know who's around these people, because this rental market was so big and huge in Virginia, and I'm only saying Virginia because that's the only one I read a book on. I didn't look at other states. It was such big business that, you know, they were renting slaves back and forth with even within their own families. And so I want to be aware of who else is around and who's not too far from Monticello with Thomas Jefferson, because again, a lot of these friends were his that were enslaved laborers, that had enslaved laborers that worked at UVA. So I keep books like Gene, and I'll share other references, you know, close to me, and also like the Slave Birth Index, and you'll see that. Because again, I'm going back and forth, you know, trying to track people down. And I stay close to the local friends in the genealogy groups, such as this one, CVHR and BBS and more. I'm looking for plantation owners, descendants. Maybe they're looking also. Maybe they're building trees, or they have trees online that I can find via Ancestry or WikiTree or Genie. Those are very popular, big websites that people upload their ancestry in, and they have to have verifiable information attached to them. Otherwise, they don't get to post it. And again, Google's my friend. Just Googling a surname and properties and looking for any historical events that happen in the area. I also look at slave narratives, cohabitation records. Military files could track me back if somebody got a pension, or someone got a pension and it lists family members. Military court cases, again, special collections, what I can get from the Jewel site, and of course, public libraries and oral histories, which I'd mentioned before. And again, my favorite record set of all time is the Freedmen Bureau records, and also looking at the rations and labor contracts, which I'll show you example. And I have books. That's my addiction is books. So they're always a good resource. So here's an example of the Slave Birth Index, if you're not aware of them. Actually, they're copies of them are at the Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society. And the Slaves for Hire, I'm going to put that at the Gibbons Library, set, you know, as a resource so people can look through there, hopefully read some of the information there at the Jefferson School. For some reason, I had 2 of them. So I'm going to donate one to that library. Freedmenville, this little book, I mean, I don't even think it's 100 pages, but it's an example. And it's only targeting the folks that were destitute freedmen. So after, you know, they became free, the Freedmen Bureau set up, this is for the destitute freedmen. So people that were elderly, sick, disabled type, they would be registered on pretty much like a separate list, separate form. And you can see I put up an example of Fluvanna County, and there's names on there. And again, this would link me possibly to somebody I'm connecting to that was an enslaved laborer, and also with that historical society as well. They know the people in their county, and so they're always such a good resource. So here's a register of colored persons, which is cohabitating, and this was Culpeper County. Looks kind of blurry, so I apologize for that. But I'm going to get a name, you know, I'm going to get a county, I'm going to get an occupation, and I'm going to get a previous owner. So right there, that links me back to somebody. And so you can follow across even the top line there. And it also gives the name of the wife, you know, where they were at, and so on. So this is another gold mine. In this record, I was able to pull down from the Library of Virginia. So not a lot of Albemarle County records. There's a lot, but not a lot. There's probably a couple hundred boxes that they have not been able to upload on Albemarle County. So they're working on it. And the more people, volunteers in the community to help transcribe records, the more records we can get up online at the Library of Virginia. So here is a little look at the Freedmen Bureau records. This was one that was a complaint, and you saw on that earlier slide, I had a Brockenbrough. Well, of course, there's more than one, But when I pulled this one up, I thought, oh, okay, this is John Brackenrow, and he's colored. Okay, well, wait a minute. Okay, I know the university professor, gentleman, is white, and the ones that are listed on my guide, my spreadsheet, but this one was colored. So again, I slide that off and say, okay, now there's a colored family. I wonder if any of the enslaved laborers that the Brackenbros own, that any of them, have a John. And was this one connected with UVA? So it's going a little bit outside of what's on my list, but I knew the surname was common. And also what I've learned over the past year and a half is that amongst the families that were slave owners, that slaves went from household to household. So another thing to look, not just focus just on the one with the name, but also look at the siblings that are slave owners in the whole family, and they're always pretty much in the same area. So again, this was a little shock. I said, oh, okay, so this enslaved person, probably enslaved, I'm going to not make that assumption that he was formerly enslaved, but took that Brackenbrow surname. Here's another record of contracts and indentures. And again, Freedmen Bureau records, that's my favorite record set of all time. This is a binding out of colored minor children, and this happens to be Fluvanna County. Why am I looking at these? Because if I've got an enslaved laborer that was enslaved in the 1840s or 50s, there's going to be children, and they could possibly still be alive. And if they can make it to 1865, 66, or even 1867, then they possibly would have went to the Freedmen Bureau records or field offices for services. It's huge. What I found just last 6 months was working in the Freedmen Bureau records, and I think it was not Charlottesville, it was Fluvanna, that I found that some of the reports and some of the records got reported to the Gordonsville field office and then the Richmond offices. So now I know I can't just look at one county. I'm going to have to go by familiar names to see if they're the same people, because just because this was Fluvanna and they had a field office, I can find records in Gordonsville, possibly on the other counties surrounding Gordonsville and Orange County in the Freedmen Bureau records. So again, I dedicate my Friday to looking at the Freedmen Bureau records. And I mean, literally, because you go to the images and it might say this roll 65 has 950 images. Well, yes, I'm going to sit there and look for familiar names that come off of that spreadsheet that I have. And I've been able to link quite a bit, and I share that information as well. But you can see on here that you got the white set and the colored set. So for folks that aren't using the Freedmen Bureau record, don't forget the refugees, because it's called the Bureau of Refugees and Freedmen in the Abandoned Land. The refugees are white. They are white people. I'm not going to say they're just poor people, but the services that were provided for the field offices typically were the help in transportation. There could be labor contracts, and you'll see one of those, and ration records and things like that that people accessed once they became free. And so the military had set up these field offices, and there's an excellent site a couple of my friends put together called Mapping the Freedmen Bureau Records, and I think it's .com. So let me switch here. So here's an example of a labor contract, and this connects to someone that's not an enslaved laborer, but I wanted to show you a labor record. And this is Ephraim Smith, who was enslaved by Tucker Coles, which the Coles, of course, were a family of slave owners. And this was, he was noted on, Sam Towler, for those of you that know him, he had noted or rewrote, like an estate record, and we saw the name on there, Ephraim Smith. Well, I knew that was Ephraim Smith because one of the people that contacted me at Jefferson School was Mr. Eugene Williams, and he said, I don't know a lot about my father's family. And so Mr. Eugene Williams, I was going up the line, but on his mama's line was the Smith line. And of course, and I'm sure others have probably come across this record too, if they used the Freedmen Bureau records. But this is Mr. Eugene Williams's great grandfather, Ephraim Smith. Now, he was owned by Tucker, but Tucker's brother, Peyton, is the one that's doing the labor contract with him. And it tells, you know, how much money he's going to make in a time frame. And I believe this was 1866. Yeah. And of course, Ephraim survived through 1870, so he's on the 1870 census. Again, yes.
Question from Kay. She wants to know, are the Freedmen's Bureau records at the Library of Virginia as well as at the local offices of the Bureau in certain towns?
Yes, but the best place to get them is familysearch.org or, yeah, familysearch.com, I'm sorry. And what you can do is, this is a little thing I do in Google, up in the where you type in a URL, put family search, comma, Freedmen, Virginia Freedmen Bureau records, and boom, it'll take you right to it. You can do the same thing if you know a record site. If it's Ancestry, do it. Type the word Ancestry, comma, and whatever that collection is, and it'll take you right to it. Because you want to pinpoint and go right to Virginia. You can go and use Discover Freedmen. Is it discoverfreedmen.org also? And you can type a name in, but it doesn't get it just to Virginia or to the state. But that's another way of researching. And that was a website that was put up by Family Search when we were doing a nationwide transcription of 1,100 rolls that Family Search had purchased from the National Archives. And so we were transcribing those Freedmen Bureau records to get them up online at Family Search. So they are there. But that's the easiest way I get to them, is starting from Google. Other than that, I have to go all the way in to Family Search and you know, go that route. And again, you go page by page. They're indexed, but once you're in on the document, it will give you at the bottom of the page, or the bottom half, it shows you the names that's in the document that you're looking at. So here's another look at a Freedmen Bureau record, which is a monthly report of destitute freedmen. This was Buckingham County, and it's a ration record. One of the things to know about the Freedmen Bureau records, which I'm kind of shocked because it's military, is that there wasn't consistency in what record forms they used at the field office. In my experience with being a military wife and so on and so forth, the military does things, yes, definitely on forms, and everybody should use the same form. That's not true. They could have the same name, but the form is going to be different. And I'm going to show you what I mean, and because I'm so jealous of the state of Louisiana. But this is a ration record report issued, and again, Buckingham County, so I've got the name, and it is totaling a man, you know, it's given the men, the women, the children, and things like that. But I got a name and I've got a date. So I've got a place for, you know, like the first person is Alex Claiborne. So I know he is in July of 1866, he is in Buckingham County. That could be a lead to coming forth on somebody's ancestor. But the ration record is where the elderly, the destitute, disabled went to the field office to get rations. And when I talk about rations, I'm talking about food and sources like that. But I was so jealous, and this really has nothing to do with my UVA research, but I was hoping when this was shared with me that in Virginia, I would find the same record form that was used on a ration report. This is St. Landry Parish, Louisiana. And again, I have not hit all of them. I'm hoping one of the counties will have the same ration report. This is St. Landry, Louisiana. And again, it's a ration report. So if you look on the right, you got the name of the person who formerly would have been enslaved. The age is not listed. The sex is there. The name of the former owner, yes. And then the name of who reported the information and then you can keep over and there could be some notes or something. But what was so fascinating for me was look down at the third person. They're 100 years old. That other one who's blind, he's 48. There was another person that was 100 years old, a female, and then an 84-year-old and an 80. This is just one little record set, but it blew my mind because it was in 1867, January, that they took this record. That 100-year-old person, and I'm going to call, John Freedhome, he would have been enslaved his whole life. And I get teary-eyed thinking about this. Same thing for the Betsy. She was enslaved her whole life. And here she's free at 100 years old, and she's going and getting rations, and I know who owned her. Same for the 84-year-old and 80-year-old. They would have been enslaved their whole life. And looking back at the 100-year-old, I sat there and I thought about this, and I was talking to my friend who's Nika Smith, and she does the Black Pro Gen stuff, and you see her on the Ancestry commercials, and she did the thing with Al Roker, and there's some more things coming up on, the shows that are getting ready to come up, the genealogy shows on TV. But anyway, and I sat there and I told her, I said, these two people were born before the Revolutionary War. And I had to think about that, and of course, teary-eyed, and thinking of that. And I wonder if their descendants know this, or if this name even came up into their ancestry to get back to someone that was 100 years old and to find the former enslaved. And you can see none of these have the same last name or surname as their slave owner. So where do I find descendants? Social media is my friend. I love social media. My children do not live in the state of Virginia with me. One is in Florida and one is in Japan. And so this is how I keep in touch with my family. And I thought this is the biggest place I could go for, my outreach to expand. So I put up a Facebook page, Finding the Enslaved Laborers at UVA. I got permission from Datisa to use her logo. And of course, I just put a photo of the memorial up there. And so I post as I'm researching questions, solicit information, share information I find. Like if I get Freedmen Bureau records, I put them up because it might not be the family that I'm looking for. It might be linked to a family, but it might help somebody else that's following the page. And so that just gives you one of the outreach efforts. And of course, this is like a question that I put out there. And I was questioning to the researchers about the surname Salmon and Solomon, and could they be the same? And has anybody seen any indication of this? And I believe the Wingfield family enslaved the Solomons in Albemarle, but I wasn't quite sure about the Salmon family. And I know about the Solomons, and you'll see that in a moment because she's part of this group and also part of BBS, and that's Shirley. And of course, you can see Sam commented, okay, and he said, Shirley Solomon said the salmon and the salmons were the same. And then he shared information from the 1867 personal property tax. Again, I had to stay local and stay within the reach because there's so many researchers in our area, and a lot of us are researching the same families. So you can see that Sam shared from Ben Ford's list, the 1867 list and those that registered. So yeah, I'm going to look through here. And as you can see here on Shirley's, what I have on a tree here with her, that I can get to her Solomon, and then I can see where it changed to Salmon on her list. And again, we're still working on that to find that. And I covered up with a little picture of me and Shirley because of course she's still alive, and I'm not sharing any information that's living. But just as an example, this is one of the trees that's in my database. So here's a look at social media. Yes, I am researching for the white slave owner family descendants just as much as I am for the enslaved laborers descendants. I cannot do, and I don't think anybody can, you cannot do African American research and not be able to also look at the white families. There's connections, they're in the same communities. You had one as the owner who created the records, who also had the records. We have to research, and I'm saying we as in researchers, we can't do research for African Americans without looking at white Americans as well. This is just an example. And this gets retweeted through the 2,000 people that follow me and anyone else that they retweet, and it keeps going out. So more times things come back in unconventional ways. So here's part of the plan. I came up with a intake form because of my experience working for HUD and Piedmont Housing Alliance locally. You had an intake. You're looking for people for a program or whatever, you had an intake. So I set up an intake, and what the Descendant group did is converted it into a Google Doc. So I have a link now that I just share and put on Facebook and email to people or whatever, and it puts it right into a spreadsheet for me. And so it's no longer a Word document that I've been mailing out. So people fill it out, and I use that like as a journal because I added a column, or they added a column for me that I could put my notes. So I know when I contacted people, some of the response or even the questions that I asked them. So again, it's a way that I'm gathering information, but it also is building off of that sheet. And I think there's 30, 40 people, once we started using the Google Doc sheets a few months ago, that have come through, and I've worked on their trees. And it's also a way for me to meet people. I'm building private trees, and you'll see that in a moment. And again, it's communication, and I can date stamp it. You know, if my boss or Ashley or anybody's asking me, well, did you talk to so-and-so? Well, I'm going to go, look at my emails or look at this form list, and I should be able to produce that information. So to date, there's over 100 trees, close to working with over 100 people. I've been doing this now, specifically this research, for a year. And we've got identified 40 plus descendants at this time. And it's growing, but the time of the research is what's critical. And so that's really what's important, is for me to be able to get that time done to do the research. I try not to go down rabbit holes, and I never say jump outside the box. No, I'm staying in that box and digging deeper because I have more success that way. So this is an example of the trees that I have. I have 100 plus private trees that are set up on each page. This is on Ancestry. This list is about 25. I think there's 25 trees per page. So I've got 6 trees. My personal stuff is also in there, but they're not identified, as male or somebody's family tree that was enslaved, or that is the enslaved descendants tree. And then I have trees that are shared with me, and I've got 3 pages of them. And, again, there's at least 25 people on each page. So here's another example of how me looking at it, and I blocked out the living people and only sharing, whose records would be public. So Davy Hearn is an enslaved laborer that was at Monticello and also at UVA. And his son Thrimston is well known, and probably everybody in here today might know about Thrimston because he was basically a stone cutter, stone mason, and had connections with building the rotunda stones. And so just to show you how I build a tree, it starts off where the blank is at, which is the living descendant, goes to their parent, then followed to the Bernard Clinton Hearn, the Lewis Hearn, up to Moses Hearn. And Thrimston is also brother to Moses, and then there's Davy Hearn. So again, you can see the trees and all the documentation that I find, of course, I put it right on the tree. There's more records and resources again, and some of these I've already mentioned. And again, the census, even though they're the first go-to for any researcher, they're also some of the most incorrect documents that we have out there. It makes us actually work harder because we don't know who gave the information on the specific years, and not till later do you know it gets identified. So in 1800 or even 1850, I don't know who gave the information. It could have been the kid next door giving that information. But this is a list of more resources that I use. This is an example of the slave schedules, looking at them. I know on the wonderful TV shows, they're always saying that's, there's your ancestor, and on a slave schedule, all you get is age and gender and their color. And we know who, I think it was a gentleman out of South Carolina that voted not to be able to put the names of the enslaved on the 1850 and 60 slave schedules. And so I just want to know that this is not necessarily a resource that I would guarantee to anybody that 29-year-old, you can look at on the 1860, there's Socrates Maupin, and that person age 28, or 29 is somebody's great grandfather or great uncle or whoever, because we really would never know that unless some other record surfaced to connect those two. So it would only be guesstimations, and I hate it when Dr. Henry Louis Gates, who I love dearly, but when they spurt that out on TV that here's your ancestor and they're showing that slave schedule, because again, you just have gender and you have age and you have color, and it's just not, it's an indication of one day in time that somebody could be there and could be close. Now somebody, you can look down under Socrates Maupin, he had a blind person there. If I had somebody's ancestor and the ages matched up, then I would probably say this could be your ancestor. 1870 census is also a big resource for me to use, because our people, as an African American, have names. And these are the components of it. And I say the reason I put this in here is because of the connections and the hints that you can get off of the census. So there's this thing I do called So What? Okay, well, I'm looking at here and I have to go through each column because that might be a clue for me finding a descendant. And so again, I'm getting the birthplace of the mother and the father. The birth month could help, were they native born, not native born, a location I'm getting. So again, it's critical because now the people that were formerly enslaved, along with, of course, the free African Americans, they're going to have names up here, and you're going to get a last name by whatever name they had taken, because they had the opportunity in 1865 and 66 when they went to the Freedmen Bureau office to give their name. And they didn't have to say their name was Shelley Murphy. Maybe their name was Shelley Davis. And that was because her grandmother was a Davis. Had nothing to do with the Murphy. So again, and we talked about this briefly before, we started this talk. So this is the blank part of the census. And in my teaching of genealogy, I want people to know what's there. So this is critical for me to follow the categories and also know what the enumerator was supposed to obtain from them and what they didn't obtain, which again could also be clues. Here's an example of the 1870 census, just so you see one filled out. This is Albemarle County, Fredericksville Parish. And just to show you, you got, going across, you got blanks and things that weren't indicated, no response to. And then you got tick marks. And can we assume the tick marks mean yes? Kind of. But again, it's giving you a name and a place, and you can see that first one up there is a Charles Maupin, and he's white. you know, but who else is next to them? Who's in the neighborhood? As I mentioned before, know your friends, associates, and your neighbors. Here's the second page of that. And you see Dabney Moffin, contribute him to his descendant that's here. And thank you for the picture. I got it off of your page. But just saying, he's working on a farm. He's 39, male and black. And then I see all the siblings. Well, if I was looking for Dabney and say I didn't have Dabney's first name, but I knew other siblings, yes, I'm going after every one of those siblings. And I would start with the one that's 1 year old because it's also a male, and start researching and going backwards from there. Here's an example of finding the descendant of Jim Henderson. Again, Facebook was a great connection, and I knew he was on the spreadsheet that I had. I went to the 1870 census. I looked for articles. I used the online database, and like I said, was able to connect with the descendant on Facebook and work with them. And PBS did the Terry Allard show. You can hear the descendant of Jim talking once we found and made this connection. But you can see my spreadsheet of information that I had to go on. And he didn't have the slaveholder's last name, which is Richard Price. So this is the path that her name is Helise to get to her third great grandfather. And you come down and it's, you can follow the Henderson last name and then go up, you know, from George to Edward to Edward. And again, there's a naming pattern, a senior and a junior, and then up to Jim. And again, we got together, met, went through the lines, did the research and things, and was able to say that's the same one. So some of the 2019 and 2020 happenings, we meet at Jefferson School, the cafe. This is where I was doing meetings before COVID, local coffee shops, the libraries, the historical societies, special collections, and anywhere I could meet, you know, evenings, weekends, didn't matter. The gathering of descendants, we did have December 14th at Jefferson School. We had 75 to 100 in attendance there. And it was also people that think they were or assume that they were descendants because their people were here. Monticello's Getting Word program put on a Memories Matter that was also held at Jefferson School. So we had a table there, and Ashley and I was set up, and we had the list with us, you know, that spreadsheet that we could check. You know, that's one of the first things is check the spreadsheet. That doesn't mean that's only the enslaved laborers that worked at UVA. Those are the ones that we've had documentation that back up that they were at UVA, because there's other enslaved laborers that were still working there, but might not have been regarding the services of buildings. So again, the spreadsheet's not the end all. The Jewel site is not the end all. We're finding new, not descendants, but new enslaved laborers pretty much all the time. I've done some presentations for Montpelier, Ollie, and the Daughters of the American Revolution, Women of Color. And my learning continues. Recently, I've got a conference coming up in October. I've went to GRIP, which is a nationally known, genealogical conference. I won an award from the Sons and Daughters of the U.S. Middle Passage for some of the research that I'm doing. And so I'm constantly learning, don't know it all. And I think it's more of a community effort to keep this going. And I appreciate the folks that answer my questions and share their work just as much, because we all got a mission here. And again, going forward, UVA is still looking at doing the private and public event in 2021. The planning is still, being addressed, and the descendant leadership group is staying together. They're active, and they're there to support me on the things that I do, along with Kurt, who's my supervisor, and Ashley and Andrea, at Jefferson School. And again, I can't say enough about the community support that's out here UVA position UVA approved my position for 2 more years, which will help, and definitely to continue the research. And then in my own personal thing besides my job is working on a book myself. So I'm ending it there and just want to say thank you, and available for any questions that any of us could answer and share in this. And there's the email for the enslaved laborers, UVA Gmail, if anyone wants to share that. And hopefully we look for more descendants to come forth, or if you have research that you've done that might link to some ancestors that might be there, I'd love to have it. So I'm done, Andy.
Thanks, Shelley. So Mary Lyons wanted you to know that UVA professor Socrates Maupin rented out the labor of Dabney to the state-financed Blue Ridge Railroad in 1854. And she has a photo of the contract that Chief Engineer Claudius Crozet signed to rent Dabney's labor. And then she wanted to thank you for
Is that Mary Lyons?
Yep.
I got it. I will look for that, Mary, and email.
And then Patrice says, congratulations on your award, Shelley. Well deserved. Diane Brown Town says, congratulations, Shelley. And Hillary says, thank you, Shelley.
Thank you. Now, Diane Brown, I'm going to mention her because the Brown family, I'm going to tell you what, guys, the Brown family connects in every county in Central Virginia. And we've got 5 or 6 different trees, and we're trying to bring all the Browns to see where the common ancestor they might have. And I'm saying as far as enslaved descendants and all the trees. And we can get back there, back to the early 1800s and knowing when they're enslaved, but now it's connecting all of the families because I think they're all related, because you see the same common patterns of the namings of the children, especially the sons. Yeah.
Hey, that was Meet the Browns before Tyler Perry.
Oh, yes. Yes. You're right. You're right. But you know what? It's so deep. And just like the Watsons, and I find them, and I worked a little bit, I went to Louisa and met with Gloria Gilmore, which a lot of you probably know. And because she was researching the Watsons. So I connect with people that are also researching the same people that I'm researching and seeing if we could bring that together. Esmont was another part that I knew there were Browns down in Esmont. And I don't have their tree, but I know there's a long history of Browns down there. But now to connect to the ones that are in Charlottesville and Fluvanna and the other counties.
Diane wants to know, is she related to Halise? Is Halise's great-great-great-grandfather, Jim Henderson, the same man as my great-great-grandfather, Jim Henderson?
That's our next Zoom meeting, Diane. That was another thing I didn't even mention. Matter of fact, 7 o'clock tonight, it's an open Zoom, and the link is on the Facebook page, is that at least once a week, I try to do a Zoom meeting where people can come in, ask questions, or even on Friday, on my Freedmanville day that I set up, and I just have the Zoom door open per se. Anybody can come in, and what are you working on? This is what I'm doing. Or we're helping each other, and it's towards some descendant family or one of the enslaved laborers or something. So it's open, or if they got genealogy questions to do, so anybody's invited.
That's awesome.
I got Sam on there one night. So we were going pretty heavy. And I think that was on some of the Browns too. So, yeah.
And Miranda wanted to remind us, Tom put this info in here too, Ask a Genealogist with Shelley is happening Wednesday, October 14th.
And I say any of my genealogy buddies, and I'm looking right at Jane Smith right at the moment, want to join us on any of that, they're welcome to that. We just want to make sure the community, which again, I'm hoping I'm also going to find some more links to some of the enslaved laborers to join us on that Zoom, because it might be someone that's helping with, to connect to their research as well as mine.
Other questions or comments or queries for Shelley?
Great job, Shelley. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Shelley, you and I should talk so I can connect you with some of the folks in Esmont. To see.
Yeah, I know the Browns, and actually, I just thought about it. I do have a tree of one of the Brown lines in Esmont. I just thought about it, and that's your cousin, Detisa, and you guys are cousins on another surname. I think it's a Moon connection, but she's got the Browns out there also. You know,
Crazy.
so, and I only shared, just so you know, that spreadsheet I have, there's probably over 2,000 entries on it. And I started originally from the beginning, from 1870 and coming forward. And just a couple months ago, I said, well, that's stupid, Shelley. Go to the 1860s, the people, and work backward instead of trying to come forward. So I spent almost a year dealing with, 1817, 1818. But I think I can gather more people if I go just before the war's over that were enslaved to find a descendant. So I just reversed my thinking on doing some of that, and I could find more coming forward rather than going back. And that's that flip-flopping going back and stuff. So.
And Shelley, they're in the Cock papers, special collections, whenever you want to, if you ever want to go say, I'll go with you if you want. All of the records of who General Cock hired out to UVA are there. It's 195 boxes though. So.
And he rented, I think it was 4. Thomas Jefferson rented 2. I think Cock rented 4 people.
He rented 4 according to UVA, but
yes.
I've seen lists where there are dozens.
Really?
Yeah.
No,
and it's go ahead, Garth.
Figured out, and I think there was 7 at one time.
Okay.
That were brought up, and then it included that was 7 to work, and then there was 1 that was brought up for a particular professor who only was there for like 1 year. It just didn't work out, and he went back. But,
well, like Nelson was hired out to whatever the anatomy professor was.
Yeah, I think was that the one? Yeah.
And then, but they're definitely, like when the rotunda was being built, a lot of the Bremo slaves are going up because they're laying the sandstone foundation steps.
Right.
We're not hiring them out like for long terms, but he's sending them up to do specific work for certain periods of time.
Right. They may very well have cut the limestone.
At Bremo.
Well, you're bringing a good point up, because what's really beautiful about the memorial, and I think this comes from the descendants and also the probably the students and the descendants, is that you're seeing the type of work, or I'm going to say the occupation that enslaved did. And I think that's really critical, because there could be this myth or this air that you think they're only the cooks or doing manual labor, as in digging stuff or whatever. But we're seeing the bricklayers, and of course, which is going to make me automatically go find the local Mason group and find out if there was part, again, because traditions, if your dad was in it or your grandfather was in it, one of those sons are also going to be in it. But to be able to see that you had the stone cutters, the carpenters, the bricklayers, the fencers, and things like that, to me is really critical. When I walk in there, and this is just the last time I was at the memorial was before COVID set in, you get such a feeling of, they're not just a laborer. You know what I mean? I might not be saying this right, but when I see skilled labor, it's huge. And for a young descendant to come along, say a 10 or 12-year-old, they can identify to say, hey, my great, whatever was a bricklayer, a mason, or provide labor services and things like that. So it's something to be so proud of, but it's also an emotional thing, because you see the blank lines also. And so it's emotional going through there for folks. If you haven't been there, please take the time. Now is actually the perfect time. because there's not really a lot of people that would be around. And but it's nice to go there. And I just sat there when I was there, just taking it in. Of course, I recognize the names because I keep going to that list all the time, or hitting a Jewel site and things like that. And for those of you that hadn't been to Jewel, it's Jefferson's University in the early life. And I could go get the link, but I'd be dropping my screen down and I need to close this up. But that's a good website. And what's there is you get the enslaved laborers or African Americans, you get slave owners, you also get the overseers also. So you can look through there, you know, for whatever research you're using. And I would say that's more updated because my list was produced whenever. And a lot of that is on, you know, my list, but any updates would probably be at the Jewel site. And so I just think it's a good resource for folks to use.
Shelley, you have, Marty asked a question. Can you comment on the level of research support you have received from white descendants of slave owners in the region?
Genealogy Buddies, 150% white support. As far as descendants of the white slave owners, haven't got one yet that I can know of. Well, Marty, not Andy. Her husband's name is up on the screen. But Marty is an example, and I'm not trying to call you out or anything, but her research in Fluvanna, and I live in Fluvanna County, and she had done a presentation to a few of us, and she's a descendant of a slave owner, 150% willing to share, give forth the effort. So far in Central Virginia, no. Kay would probably be support. You know, I haven't reached out to Kay, but people that I know that are also doing similar work and connected, no issues, no problems. I think there's some fear and hold back on a lot, and hopefully that will change. You know, so now I'm not calling them a slave owner, which I didn't anyway. But when I tweet out the names, I'm looking for the descendants, and this is what I'm looking for. I'd like to know where their papers are at. Can I have access to them? You know, and to find out, because typically they're not all at home in that house repository. A lot of your larger slave owners are going to have their papers donated. And I found one of my ancestors out of Jefferson County, West Virginia, which was Virginia before, Nicholas Roper, and his papers are at Duke. And it's like, what are they doing down at Duke? So I imagine one of the descendants was down there and handed over all of their information. And, you know, I'm sorry, Battle Muse was the person. He was like George Washington's accountant or something. All of his papers are at Duke University. So you don't know where you're going to find this information. And a lot of resources and references are in books. And I go look, you know, to find out where people got their information from. But WikiTree is another one I can track because I belong with my own family on there. And the slave owners, a lot of the descendants have their trees and things up on that. And I can see some of the stuff. I can't get everything like inventories, but I can ask and keep asking.
Lisa is having to leave, but she wanted to say to everyone, the proctor's papers, especially the miscellaneous receipts, are great places to look for the names of enslaved who are being paid for their hire, for their overseeing, their provisioning, and also the women who are paid to make their clothing, knit their socks, etc. And she wanted to say, thanks, terrific project. Thanks for sharing, Dr. Murphy. Happy to help if there's ever a need.
Thank you.
And the Proctor's Day Book is a PDF that you can download. That's not all of the Proctor's papers.
Right.
The early Proctor's Day Book is a PDF that you can download.
And see, on my spreadsheet, what you couldn't see is where they got that information, which is the Proctor information, bursar, and things from that. So I need to connect and see who I'm missing that might be on the download and maybe not on, you know, my spreadsheet.
Diane wants to know what percentage of your descendant families have done their own research versus those who are starting from scratch.
I would say about half of them. And about half of them have already done research or have gotten back to, say, maybe the 1870 census and want help getting past that. And so then I share the resources in my 30 plus years of doing research and say, and again, get on Zoom, let's do it together also. So, which is an option, because I really enjoy working with the descendants. And I think that's such an important part because they're going on that journey. And it's not just me, doing hours of research, but they also get to experience that. I think the last one I had was one of Detisa's cousins. And we were on after midnight and loving it, having fun, joking, but we were each researching, finding the same thing to connect. So it's another line to another enslaved laborer that we had found. And again, once you get started, all of you know that do research, once you get on a lead, you can't let it go. You got to finish it. You can't go to bed because you're going to forget. You're going to think you're going to forget. But we get on Zoom and just have a great time. So I think the involvement of the descendants is really what's critical, for me at least. And I know that's the support of Mel and Kurt and, UVA, is to make sure they're included in the process. I can't do it without other people. I'm one person, one researcher, and I have to have the community support, and I'm lucky to be in this area. Tell you, it's not that way in other areas where I do my own personal research or have done for clients. We just don't have the wealth and the knowledge that's in this area in Central Virginia like it is, so happy for that.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, we don't want to make our recording 80 hours long. We'll watch
I hope it recorded. It did.
So Shelley, you and I'll connect and we can get that file to me and I'll get it up.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording then.
Perfect.